Meanwhile, here in the U.S., the rich now getting richer, the poor getting poorer. Right now, we are seeing record poverty numbers, unemployment stuck at over 9%. In the wake of the Occupy Wall Street protests, we are seeing more dialogue over the rising income inequality gap and a shifting mindset toward the rich. Being affluent and obtaining financial success was once admired in the United States. Now, not so much. We're hearing loud calls to put an end to corporate greed and corruption and for the top 1% to pay their fair share of taxes. So what is behind the changing perception of the rich these days? Joining me now is Seton Motley, founder and president of Less Government, and Max Fraad Wolff, senior analyst of Greencrest Capital. Max, I'd like to start with you. Do you think that there is a changing perception of the rich, and if so, why?
I most definitely do. I think Occupy Wall Street probably represents the tip of the iceberg. And as with a real iceberg, the majority is sort of below the surface where you can't see them. But I think we've seen 30 to 35 years of median upward wealth redistribution in the United States. And we've seen the last 3 years, really the last 3 years, be a kind of top-up boom in that process. We saw the average only asset that most Americans have, their house, lose approximately 30 to 35% of its value. In the same time, since the March 2009 lows for the stock market, we've seen equity prices approximately double. So 35 years into an upward wealth redistribution, we have a sort of top-up boom in that, occurring with a continued depression in the housing market, very weak labor markets, and a relatively much better situation in the asset world. And I think in some kind of ironic, symbolic sense, the death of Steve Jobs also kind of marks the death of one of the last sort of innovators who was admired despite his enormous salary. So we have both the literal and the figurative shift in moods, partially, I think, made very clear by the Occupy Wall Street movement and its astonishing early success.
And what do you think in the wake of these Occupy Wall Street protests? Are the rich losing their appeal?
No, the Occupy Wall Street is a shard of a fringe of the American populace. They're too busy occupying public parks to go look for work. There is work out there. This assault on the rich is patently absurd. The top 1% of earners pay 40% of the taxes. That is an unconstitutional tax rate. You are guaranteed equal protection before the law. It is unconstitutional to charge different people different rates based upon their income. These people need to stop fixating on other people and what they earn, because it's nobody's business but the person writing the check and the person cashing it, and get to work on improving their own lives rather than trying to tear down someone else.
But see, and one of the grievances that we are hearing from the Occupy Wall Street movement is that the rich, they don't pay their fair share of taxes.
1% pay 40. That's not their fair share. If they were to pay their fair share, they'd do a dramatic tax cut.
Well, I want to bring your attention to...
That depends on what you think their share is. See, and that's actually a legitimate philosophical debate. Should they pay their population weight, in which case 1% of people should pay 1% of the taxes?
Yes.
Or should they pay a tax rate indexed to the progressive federal income tax?
It's unconstitutional to do that.
All right, well,
it's unconstitutional to do that. You have to amend the Constitution.
And I definitely want to continue this debate, but I want to bring up this new study, these new results that came out. If we have that graphic there, take a look at the findings of a new report from Citizens for Tax Justice. Of the 280 companies looked into, and they're all Fortune 500 companies raking in billions, most don't pay their fair share of taxes. Many don't pay a corporate income tax at all. Federal income tax usually they're required to pay, the big corporations are required to pay 35% of the corporate income tax rate. On average, the corporations only paid half of that. Even more, 78% of them at some point paid no federal income tax at all. So, and how could you, with this information, how can you go ahead and say that they're paying their fair share?
Well, first of all,
many of them aren't even paying.
First of all, you just changed the discussion. We were talking about individuals, now we're talking about corporations. Two entirely different discussions. Second of all, we have the second highest corporate tax rate on planet Earth. So, of course, these companies move out of the country. You're driving job producers out of the country with the second highest corporate tax rate on the planet. They're going to go somewhere else where they're not abused and beaten about the head and shoulders with tax and regulatory policy. So, of course, they're not going to pay their fair share, because I'm using your language. They're not going to pay the corporate tax rate because it's too high. They're going to go to another country where it's lower, more reasonable, and they get the money rather than us.
Max, what do you think? We just showed you that information there. Corporate tax rate, are they paying their fair share?
Well, large corporations in the United States have a very convoluted tax code. I think we all could agree we have a very convoluted, extensive, long, full of loophole tax code. That tax code has conspired to create a situation where folks trying to be the best corporate citizens aren't doing right by their shareholders. Everybody works to try to make their corporate effective tax rate lower. The average effective tax rate's less than half the official 35% rate. And so on some level, we know that corporations are paying far less than the legally mandated 35% on their enormous incomes. On the other hand, we know that our tax structure is so convoluted and so full of holes that it's basically designed not to deliver the revenue that the society needs, and that puts us on the cusp of a real budgetary disaster because we've been spending way beyond our income at the federal and as well the state and local levels, which we see with the Jefferson County bankruptcy in Alabama, for a long time. So we need to figure out a way to increase our revenue and decrease our spending. Otherwise, we're on a patently unsustainable path with a high official rate and a low actual payment structure, which is what your numbers refer to.
You're exactly right. The tax code's a joke, and there's only one Democrat that's consistently said they want to reform the tax code. That's Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. Other than that, the Democrats love the loophole-ridden tax code with thousands and thousands and thousands of pages because it makes them more...
But with all due respect, I think our problem is this large because we've had bipartisan agreement on a dysfunctional tax collection system.
But there's one Democrat. Wait. There's been one Democrat, and Republicans have been calling for tax reform for years, and there's one Democrat that's agreed. The Democrats have stymied it over the last decade or more. Republicans have consistently called for tax reform, for simplifying the code. We want a single rate for individuals. We want a single rate for corporations. We want to abolish the death code, the death tax, because it costs more.
Well, that's one of many possible reform packages. So I think we've seen both Democrat and Republican majorities in House, Senate, and presidency in the last 20 years. We haven't seen either of them substantively remake the tax code in ways that have made the country better off.
The Republicans did in the 2000s.
But we
do know. The Republicans did in the 2000s when they controlled all three.
But we do know that despite the fact that no one has done the tax code that you're proposing,
knowing the Republicans
we do know that we're paying. Well, if you want to talk to yourself, you don't need to go on TV.
No, but you're asserting unfactually inaccurate things.
I don't think I have that particular problem, but you can wait for your turn and you can make that assertion.
Well, you interrupted me, and then I interrupt you back, and you get upset.
I'm not sure
I'm going to jump in here. Seton, an argument that you made earlier on is that, and we're hearing it from conservatives, is that we're hearing this over and over again, is that the corporate 1%ers, that they are the job creators. But the way it's, unemployment is at a record high. Where are these so-called jobs that are being created?
When government becomes more active, the gap between rich and poor grows. Because when you're taxing at a higher rate, if you took every penny Bill Gates made this year, he'd still be rich. But at that tax rate, you're destroying job creation and wealth acceleration for the 99%. When you have the government being as active with regulations as the government has been the last 3 years, with the power grab that is net neutrality, with the power grab that is Obamacare, with the inaction of the cap and trade bill, even though it never passed Congress, like net neutrality didn't pass Congress, when you have the NLRB attacking businesses for making free market decisions, all of that regulatory action, all of that government action, all of that higher taxation, higher regulation creates a schism, creates uncertainty in the marketplace. People will not hire. They'll sit on their money, and as they sit on their money, their wealth increases. They're not expanding their businesses. They're not hiring, and the gap between rich and poor grows. When you reduce the activity of government, when you reduce the size, scope, and sphere of influence, when you reduce regulations, when you reduce spending, when you reduce taxes at the federal level, the gap between rich and poor narrows because the other 99% are actually engaged in the economy and can rise up.
Max, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, look, there are plenty of examples of regulations that push an onerous burden that are bad for job employment. The problem is not all regulations are bad. Some are required for a market to function. Perhaps. Some are required for a market to function.
Name one.
In addition to which we've seen
Name one.
I think you're giving up. I think this is a case study in your slight etiquette problem here, sir. So I'm going to answer
Name a regulation that helps job creation. Name a regulation that helps job creation.
I don't believe I'm being interviewed by you. I believe you're having something of a public etiquette problem here. But that notwithstanding, I'm going to try to comply with the host. I'll give you that. Our regulatory history is full of the following examples. We have had periods of falling regulation with tanking jobs. We've had a period of rising regulations with rising jobs. At some point, we all have to grow up here, and the government isn't just good or just bad. It depends on what the government actually does. That's where the rubber meets the road. If the government trains people, gives them education, builds infrastructure, and builds the kind of environment required for business to thrive, then businesses thrive and jobs do better. If they don't, then the environment becomes toxic, and we see declining wages. What we've seen over the last bunch of years, however, is people who are very nervous about the future, in part because there's adequate demand in the marketplace. We have high unemployment, we have stagnant wages, and that's led businesses to see their future as disproportionately overseas, which is why we see transnational corporate employment growth growing more outside the U.S. than inside the U.S., and that does have something to do with our job situation. In addition to which, for the last 20 consecutive months, we've saw public sector employment decline, and we haven't seen the private sector pick up the slack by enough to fully offset, which is why, while we've had some months of positive job growth, which is good, it's highly inadequate, and we're still stuck at an unemployment rate of around 9%, with a real U6 inclusive unemployment rate of around 16%. And so we have to consider political stability as well as what the long-term history lessons are from different various forms of government regulation, some of which are supportive and others.
Then you would agree that we need to get rid of the Obama administration then? Because they are the kings of uncertainty, they're the kings of overregulation, they're the kings of illegal regulation.
I think our problems are bigger than a single president.
They've gotten dramatically worse. They've gotten dramatically worse in the last 3 years under the Obama administration. They have unleashed.
I think they've gotten worse in the last 3 years, but I don't know if it's just the Obama. I think our problems are much bigger than that.
Obama's unleashed a regulatory tsunami. He's averaging about 3,000 new regulations a year.
Congress also is the actual body with the legal right to do regulations.
My point exactly. Obama's bypassing Congress. He came out and said, we can't wait for Congress to act, so we're going to do it illegally. He's been doing it illegally all along. He's enacting a cap and trade without congressional authority. He just enacted net neutrality without congressional authority. He's enacting card check without congressional authority. Where's he getting congressional authority?
Card check, though. Card check
the NLRB is enacting it as if it passed.
The NLRB decision vis-a-vis. If you're talking about NLRB versus Boeing, that's not a card check decision, though. That was done by the National Labor Relations Board.
No, but they're enacting large swaths of card check as if it passed, even though it did not.
All right, I'm going to switch the conversation. You might see eye to eye a little bit more on this next topic. Somebody in the 1% is not having a very good day today. Let's take a look at this video of Rick Perry. It's been getting a lot of airtime lately.
It's 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone. Commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
You need 5.
Oh, 5, okay. So commerce, education, and the
EPA?
EPA, there you go. No, okay.
Let's talk deposition. Seriously? Is EPA the one you were talking about? Or?
No, sir. No, sir. We were talking about the agencies of government. EPA needs to be rebuilt. There's no doubt about that.
But you can't name the third one?
The third agency of government,
yeah.
I would do away with the education, the commerce, and let's see. I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry. Oops.
Oops is right. Now, he can't even remember an entire government agency that he wants to cut. Now he's being attacked. This is turning into the whole highlight of the debate, a debate that was supposed to be focused on the economy. What do you make of the coverage of this Perry
Reminds me of Obama without his teleprompter.
I don't know if Obama's ever forgotten anything that significant.
Yes, he has. Go search Obama Flake on YouTube. It's got 1 million views. I made the video. I have many examples of Obama off the teleprompter fumbling for words. So yes, look, this happens in public speaking. Not to me personally, but this is human foibles. He's I actually used to live in Texas. His worst setting is the debate. He's much better in most other settings.
What do you think, Max?
Well, I think we could all agree that this was not a high point for his candidacy. It doesn't seem like the debates are particularly his cup of tea. I think it is a little bit surprising and on some level distressing that the agency he forgot, the Department of Energy, is particularly active and embattled in his home state of Texas. And energy, last time I checked, was a leading business sector in Texas. But I mean, in fairness to the fellow, it doesn't seem like debates or public speaking are particularly his bailiwick, and that was on kind of almost shocking and truly horrifying display last night in the debate. You know, one is left wondering to what extent he does successful fundraising going forward, because it's going to be a little bit harder for him than it would have been absent what was a sort of long, drawn-out, painful misadventure that unfortunately was either watched or more likely replayed for millions of likely voters over the last 24 hours.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for weighing in on these issues. That was Seton Motley, founder and president of Less Government, and Fraad Wolff, senior analyst at Greencrest Capital.